a lot of us have been studying this now, for 50 years, and know that there's a pattern to genocide. You can see it coming. I mean, it's like a hurricane. Genocide is defined as the intentional destruction, in whole or in part, of a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group as such. And then it goes on to list acts that can constitute genocide, including a murder, a conspiracy to commit genocide, taking the children of a group away from the group, creating conditions of life that are deliberately intended to destroy the group, creating serious mental and bodily harm to members of the group that's aimed to destroy the group, etc. So there it is. That's the definition written into the Genocide Convention. The statements by President Clinton, for instance, when he made this famous statement at the Kigali airport, in which he stood up and said to everyone there, we who were sitting at desks in the United States just didn't know. That was a lie. He did know.
You read those?
I read the cables that came in from Rwanda and from, they were still in the files. They were top secret code word cables, but I had that clearance, and so I actually saw those cables. And we had shiploads of Marines right off the coast in the Indian Ocean who could have been gotten into Rwanda within days to stop this. So in other words, the news got out, and but I can tell you this: it didn't make me very popular in the State Department that I was kept after this story, because we weren't supposed to be asking these questions. And the truth of the matter is, I think we have to ask these questions.
The State Department made a conscious effort to avoid to use the word genocide.
Yes, it was literally in the press guidance, as they call it, the orders to the press spokesman for the State Department not to use the word. And ultimately, they knew this was very embarrassing, and they kept getting asked this question. And so ultimately, the lawyers came up with this strange formulation in which they said, well, yes, acts of genocide have occurred. And then, of course, there's this famous scene in which Louise Shelley, bless her heart, and I really feel for her here, because she was just reading from a script. I mean, this was not her fault, in which a reporter asked her, well, how many acts of genocide does it take for it to be a genocide? And she said, well, I'm just not prepared to answer that. Finally, Warren Christopher just broke through the whole foolishness, and he's a lawyer, and said, that's how genocide is defined by the Genocide Convention. It's defined as acts. And if you read the convention, sure enough, that's what it is. So after that, we started using the word genocide, but that wasn't until June. This is 3 months into the genocide, and during which most of the people had been killed that died. And I am literally, legally not allowed to tell you his name, because it is a felony in the United States to reveal the name of people who are in intelligence. I can't tell you, but this person later went on to become, a high briefer to the president on Africa. October and November of 1996, the Rwandan government supported a group of Congolese led by Laurent Kabila to invade the Congo and go all the way to Kinshasa and overthrow the Mobutu government. Mobutu was sick, and the regime fell very quickly. So the question is, what role did the U.S. play in this? And it was a pretty direct supporting role. I happened to go to Rwanda in October and November of 1996, just before this invasion took place, because I had been sent to investigate problems in the legal system and in the setting up of the Rwandan tribunal. And it was really quite astonishing. When I went over to the U.S. Embassy, the ambassador said I was not to come into the U.S. Embassy. Now, this is astonishing. I was a Foreign Service officer. And I had actually been instructed to go out there by Madeleine Albright, who was our UN ambassador herself, and by her legal advisor, David Sheffer. And so there I was. I still did my investigation, and I went over to Arusha, and I was there. And our embassy just looked a lot different than when I lived there in '88 and '89, because it had all of these big dishes, these communication dishes in the yard. I talked to some of the defense attachés and others, and they told me that major shipments of weapons were coming in at night to support the Rwandan army, that we had placed people in the country who were training Rwandan army troops, and in short, we were supporting the invasion. And reports started coming in about atrocities that had been committed by the Kabila forces as they rampaged across the Congo, in which they had slaughtered thousands of Hutu civilians. Now, believe me, I have no sympathy whatsoever for these genocidaires, these Interahamwe guys who had, committed the genocide in Rwanda. As far as I'm concerned, they ought to be hunted down. But I'm sorry to be so blunt about that, but the civilians, obviously, the children, the women, are you kidding? Why would they be victimized by this? And yet, the reports started coming in that they were literally just being slaughtered, and bodies were being piled up and burnt and everything else. And I couldn't ignore these reports. They were coming in from human rights groups, from cables from various sources and so forth. And so I kept asking our intelligence people, is there any truth to this? I mean, what's happening out there? And they would always tell me, well, we can't see through the clouds. They have these planes, that are supposed to be able to go over the clouds and look down with their cameras and everything else. I said, well, have you ever thought about sending a human being in? It's real old-fashioned intelligence gathering, but it still works. They finally, literally, I was called in by the director of Central African Affairs in the State Department and essentially ordered to stop asking these questions in the meetings. And I said to him, I could not stop asking these questions in the meetings. It was my job. I worked for the Human Rights Bureau. And I frankly didn't care if I was fired by the State Department. I could always go back to teaching. And in the period between 96 and today, the estimates are up to 5 million people have died in the Congo, which of course dwarfs the 800,000 who died in Rwanda. It's one of the biggest wars in all of history. Various groups want to control wherever the mines are that mine the coltan, which is the material used in cell phones, for instance, and the gold and the tin and all the other riches of the Congo. It's a very rich country. And those areas that have all of this wealth have been controlled by Uganda and Rwanda and so forth for a number of years. And their proxies, their militia proxies. Every time Paul Kagame comes into Washington, D.C., I get up at his briefings and ask him, why are you supporting this militia group out there that's killing people? He always denies that they're doing it.